A homeowners association, aiming to poison one man's enjoyment of a lake, ended up poisoning their entire neighborhood instead. It all began the morning the water turned a ghostly white. At first, residents mistook it for fog. A strange, thin film stretched across the water's surface, like milk spilled over dark glass. By midday, the grim reality began to surface as dozens of fish floated lifelessly, their mouths agape and gills a ghastly pale. The screams of children who had come to feed the ducks shattered the quiet, while one man reported the acrid taste of bleach hanging in the air. This was the first undeniable sign that something was terribly wrong in Cypress Glen. At the neighborhood's far end, Taryn Blake stood on his back porch, completely unaware. He was holding his morning coffee, gazing at the lake that had been his weekend sanctuary since the day he moved in. His initial thought was dumped paint, perhaps fertilizer. But then his dog, Scout, bounded down to the water's edge and began to lick the milky surface. That's when the smell hit Taryn sharp, chemical, and profoundly wrong. He shouted, "Hey, don't drink that!" But it was too late. The dog had already taken several laps. Within hours, Scout was violently ill in the yard. Taryn raced him to the emergency vet in nearby College Station, Texas, where the veterinarian could only shake her head and deliver the grim news. "It appears he's ingested something highly toxic," she said, "possibly antifreeze or a pesticide." A knot of dread tightened in Taryn's stomach. "It came from the lake behind my house," he managed to say. The vet's expression immediately shifted. "Then you need to call environmental services. Now, that is not normal." By evening, yellow police tape cordoned off the walking trail, and a stark white pickup bearing the county seal was parked ominously. It stood near the dock as residents gathered in hushed, anxious groups, whispering theories about what could have happened. Some speculated it was a tragic accident. Others pointed fingers at runoff from a nearby construction site. But no one's gaze fell on Taryn. Even though his weekend fishing ritual was common knowledge, deep down, Taryn had a chilling certainty about who was responsible. Just 2 weeks prior, another email had arrived from Evelyn Strafford, the HOA president. It certainly wasn't the first. The subject line was cold and official: unauthorized use of shared property. In it, she claimed, that fishing was prohibited in the community lake, citing a forgotten bylaw that hadn't been enforced for years. Taryn had replied with polite reason. He pointed out that he'd reviewed the community handbook before moving in, which only forbade commercial fishing. Evelyn offered no response. Instead, a notice for a $150 fine silently appeared in his mailbox the very next day. Now, standing by the yellow tape, Taryn watched her striding toward the lake, clipboard in hand, her beige slacks perfectly pressed. She wore a visor that screamed control. "Mr. Blake," she called out, her tone sickeningly sweet, yet completely hollow. "I do hope you're not considering going near the water. It's merely being treated for algae. The HOA took care of it this morning." Taryn stared at her, incredulous. "Treated with what?" She gave a flippant wave of her hand. "Oh, just standard chemicals. Perfectly safe. You'll see. The color will clear up in a day or two." He glanced from the toxic white film back to her face. "Safe? My dog is at the vet right now because of your treatment." Her smile never wavered. "Well, perhaps you should be more diligent about keeping your dog out of restricted areas. Mr. Blake." Then she pivoted to the county worker, dismissing him as if he were invisible. That was the precise moment something inside him broke. Having worked with machinery and industrial solvents for years, Taryn knew with absolute certainty that the smell was not algae control. It was industrial grade. Whatever they had poured into that lake wasn't for cleaning, it was a punishment. That night, seated at his kitchen table, his laptop illuminated a single urgent query: the toxicity of chemical algae treatments for lakes. His screen filled with page after page of stark warnings regarding copper sulfate and diquat, both heavily restricted for widespread residential application. A single line seized his attention: "Can leach into groundwater and contaminate drinking water sources." The words echoed in his mind into the next morning. He filled a glass directly from the kitchen faucet, holding it up to the morning light. It appeared pristine, perfectly clear, deceptively clean. He risked a sip, but the thought lodged itself in his mind. What if it isn't? Across the street, the neighborhood was already buzzing with complaints. One woman claimed her children developed stomach cramps just from brushing their teeth. Another insisted her tap water reeked of a swimming pool. Tehran watched as Evelyn stood outside her home, addressing a few board members who nodded along as if everything was perfectly under control. He desperately wanted to believe her, but the image of Scout, still at the vet and hooked to an IV, was all the proof he needed, proof that something had gone horribly wrong. That evening, he found himself drawn back to the lake, the air unnervingly quiet. The silence was broken only by the faint buzz of an insect lamp on a nearby porch. The water's surface was a lifeless mirror, without a single ripple. There was no movement. He reached down and picked up a small perch. Once silver and vibrant, it crumbled to dust in his hand. Tyrone's jaw tightened as he whispered, "This isn't over." From behind him, a soft voice responded, "It never should have happened." He spun around to find Ruth Ann Marlowe, his neighbor from 2 houses down. She worked for the county's Environmental Protection Office. Her expression was guarded, uneasy. "You know something about this, don't you?" he pressed. She hesitated, her eyes darting towards Evelyn's house. "Not here," she whispered. "Come to my place tomorrow morning. I think you'll want to see what I've found." Tyrone watched her retreat beneath the dim streetlights, his mind racing with possibilities. He had no idea what she had discovered, but one thing was certain. This was about much more than just a lake now. But what Ruth Ann was prepared to show him the following morning would shatter everything Tyrone thought he knew about his new neighborhood. Before the world tilted on its axis, Tyrone Blake was a man who preferred his own company, working long, grueling shifts as a warehouse supervisor. His post was at a logistics hub just outside of Bryan, Texas, the kind of labor that left a man tired, proud, and sore, all at the same time. Every day, he'd clock out around 5, drive home with the country station humming low, and park his old Ford pickup in its usual spot. It was always under the pecan tree behind the house he'd bought 2 years prior, a dream he'd saved for nearly a decade to achieve. 3 bedrooms, a screened-in porch, and a small deck that overlooked the lake. For him, that view was the entire point. He'd spent his childhood fishing with his grandfather near the Brazos River. Sitting by still water was his sanctuary, his way of quieting his mind. It was where he felt the noise of the world couldn't reach him. Most evenings, you'd find him out on that deck, barefoot, cap pulled low, casting his line. He'd stay out while the sun bled into the horizon. He wasn't one for HOA meetings or neighborhood potlucks. He simply paid his dues. He'd offer a wave to passers-by and kept to himself. That was his rhythm, right up until Evelyn Strafford arrived. She had moved to Cypress Glen just the year before, and in no time at all, she was the Homeowners Association president. Retired early from a high-powered bank job in Dallas, she governed the HOA like it was her own private kingdom. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair wrenched back into a severe bun, and a voice that carried the weight of a judge's gavel. Her lawn looked as though it were trimmed with surgical scissors, and from the very beginning, she made it clear she didn't care for Tyrone. Perhaps it was his weathered truck that first drew her ire, or the sight of his work boots on the pristine sidewalk when they first exchanged word. Her first complaint concerned his parking, inches too close to the curb. Her second, a pointed remark about his visible fishing equipment. Taryn had chuckled, assuming she was making a joke. "You do know this is a lake neighborhood, right?" But Evelyn's stare was icy and humorless. "We have rules, Mr. Blake. We maintain a certain standard here." From that moment on, he was under her constant, literal surveillance. He'd noticed the subtle twitch of her blinds whenever he was outside. Sometimes she'd just stand at the edge of her lawn, arms folded, as if daring him to cast his line. He tried to brush her off, but the emails began shortly after. Deceptively polite at first, citing community guidelines on the proper use of shared property. Then the fines were issued. $50 for equipment left visible. Then $100 for an unapproved backyard modification because he'd installed a small wooden bench near the dock. Taryn later recounted this to his friend Devin Harris, who worked alongside him at the warehouse. "It feels like that woman is allergic to peace," he said. "I breathe wrong and she's got a form for it." Devin laughed, but there was a warning in his tone. "You better be careful, man. Those HOA types have real power. I saw one neighbor lose his mailbox just for having the wrong shade of beige." Yet, Taryn refused to back down. He loved that lake, personally clearing every bottle and piece of trash that washed up on its shores. Neighborhood kids would sometimes stop to watch him fish, and he'd let them reel one in, a simple act that brought him joy but was not universally appreciated. A few neighbors started whispering as he walked by. Then, one day, his fishing line was found sliced clean through while he'd stepped inside for a drink. He started locking his tackle box in the shed. One evening, he spotted Evelyn speaking with 2 men near the HOA notice board. They all glanced in his direction, then back at her, and the 3 of them shared a laugh. That quiet sound hit him like a physical blow. When he returned home that night, he sat by the window and gazed at the lake, its surface perfectly calm beneath the moonlight. Scout rested by his feet, his tail thumping softly. "We didn't do anything wrong," Taryn said quietly. "We just like it here." He wanted to believe the hostility would fade, that people would realize he wasn't causing any harm. Instead, the HOA doubled down. A newsletter arrived the following week, highlighting a newly enforced rule. Fishing in the community lake is prohibited without express written approval from the HOA board. It was the same rule that had been ignored for years. The next morning, Evelyn appeared at his door, holding the letter. "Good morning, Mr. Blake," she said briskly. "Just making sure you received the update." Taryn kept his voice even. "You resurrected this rule just for me." Her expression never wavered. "I enforced it, Mr. Blake. There's a difference." She turned to leave, but he called after her. "What did I ever do to you?" Evelyn stopped, her hand on her hip. "This isn't personal. It's about maintaining the character of our community." He almost scoffed. "Character? You poisoned that the moment you brought your hatred into it." For the first time, for just a second, she looked rattled. Then, her voice turned cold. "Watch yourself, Mr. Blake. That kind of attitude doesn't go unnoticed around here." And she walked away. Her heels clicked against the pavement like a judge's gavel. That night, Taryn sat on his porch again, his line inert in the water, thinking about her words. The lake shimmered in the fading light, still and silent. He wondered what kind of person could look at such profound peace and decide it was a problem. But trouble has a way of finding people who aren't looking for it, and Taryn was about to find out just how far one woman would go to erase him from her picture of perfection. It didn't take long for the tension between Taryn. The feud between Blake and Evelyn Strafford was about to escalate into something the entire neighborhood would feel. Initially, the conflict was confined between them, a volley of vexing emails, and the sporadic, tense encounter at the mailbox. But it wasn't long before other residents started choosing sides, and though nothing was said aloud, the first true spark ignited on a Saturday morning. Taryn was meticulously cleaning his grill in the driveway when Evelyn's pristine white Lexus glided to a stop at the curb, its window descending with deliberate slowness. "Mr. Blake," she called out, her voice sharp, "we've received several complaints regarding excessive noise emanating from your property." "Last night?" He blinked, perplexed. "Noise? I was just watching a baseball game by myself." "Well," she retorted. Her tone was as sharp as glass. Someone clearly found it disruptive. "This community values its quiet and order." He placed the brush down, wiping his hands on a rag. "Evelyn, with all due respect," he said evenly, "you can't just invent rules whenever the mood strikes you." Her jaw clenched instantly. "You are more than welcome to attend the next HOA meeting if you have concerns," she stated coldly. "Sure," he replied, leaning casually against his fence. "I'll be there. I might even bring my fishing rod as a prop." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Do not test me, Mr. Blake." She drove off without another word. She left behind only the faint scent of new car leather and pure arrogance. When Taryn arrived at the HOA meeting, 2 weeks later, he found every single chair in the clubhouse occupied, mostly by older couples, retirees, and a handful of younger families. Evelyn commanded the front of the room, flanked by a neat stack of papers and a projector displaying the agenda, community standards, and property usage. Taryn took a seat in the back, silent but observant. When his name was called, heads swiveled in his direction. "As you are all aware," Evelyn began, her voice resonating through the room, "we've had persistent issues with non-compliance concerning the lake property. Despite numerous prior warnings, certain residents continue to misuse our shared spaces." A whisper snaked from the front row. "That's him, isn't it?" Taryn raised his hand. "May I speak?" Evelyn paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Then, with a veneer of forced patience, she conceded, "You have 3 minutes." He rose to his feet slowly. "I moved here because I believed this was a peaceful neighborhood. I fish at that lake because it's how I unwind after 12-hour shifts. I don't leave any trash, I don't cause any damage, and I abide by the very same rules as everyone else." Evelyn offered a tight, dismissive smile. "But the rule book," he cut her off sharply. "The rule book was amended times after times I began fishing there. That isn't enforcement, that's targeting." A murmur rippled through the assembled residents. One man, Tom Ridley, raised his hand. He has a point. We've lived in this community for 10 years, and people have fished there that entire time. Not a single word was said until just recently. Evelyn produced a well-rehearsed laugh. Tom, we are simply upholding our community standards. Surely, you want to maintain property values? Tom's brow furrowed. I want fairness, not whatever this is. For a moment, Evelyn's practiced smile faltered before she hastily moved on to the next agenda item. But the atmosphere in the room had irrevocably shifted. Some neighbors now avoided Taryn's gaze, while others offered him small, discreet nods of support. Following the meeting, a woman named Ruthan approached him. "You handled that very well," she said softly. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene," he replied. "I just want to be left in peace." She cast a nervous glance around them. Evelyn doesn't like to lose control. Be careful. That warning resonated in his mind for days, especially when strange things started to happen. His garbage cans were suddenly knocked over. A note mysteriously appeared under his door that read, "Find another place to fish." And then, one morning, he awoke to find the words, "Private property." He found graffiti defacing the small dock he used. So he documented the damage and took the photos directly to the HOA office where, as expected, Evelyn was waiting. Feigning astonishment, she peered at the photos and said, "My goodness, Mr. Blake, that's just terrible. But I fail to see how this is an HOA matter." "It concerns you," he retorted sharply, "because whoever is responsible is part of this community, the one you're always boasting about." She folded her hands, her voice chillingly calm. "If you are implying I had a hand in this, I'd be very careful with your accusations." "I'm not implying a thing," he said quietly. "I'm stating that you let this happen." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she held her tongue. She simply stood, smoothed her jacket, and announced, "This conversation is concluded." As Taryn walked away, a dreadful, sinking feeling settled in his stomach. He wasn't contending with a mere rule enforcer. He was up against someone who relished control far too much to ever let it go. Over the next week, the tension became a visible shroud over the neighborhood. Neighbors avoided his gaze, while a few offered whispered apologies when Evelyn wasn't looking. Others, however, acted as if Taryn was the one causing all the trouble. One evening, as he fixed a garden hose, Ruth Ann paid him a visit. "You might want to be on alert," she whispered. "I heard from a source on the board that they're planning some kind of treatment for the lake. It's Evelyn's proposal, supposedly for algae control." Taryn scowled. "What kind of treatment?" She was vague, but she railroaded it through, without any environmental review. "I tried to request the documentation, and she just shut me down." He glanced out toward the lake. It was calm, gleaming under the setting sunday. "That lake is pristine. There's no algae." "I know," Ruth Ann replied. "That's what's so frightening." But neither of them could have predicted how quickly that so-called treat would morph from a petty HOA power play into something truly dangerous. By early summer, the entire mood in Cypress Glen had curdled. What were once friendly waves and porch-side greetings had devolved into tight-lipped smiles and half-hearted nods. Taryn felt the chill. It was a palpable difference every time he stepped outside. This wasn't open warfare, it was something quieter, more unnerving. He would walk, scout around the block, and hear screen doors snap shut just a little too quickly, or conversations would abruptly halt as he approached. At first, he tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was all in his head, that people were just minding their own business. But then the small aggressions began to mount. His mailbox vanished one morning. The post bolts were still anchored in the ground, but the box itself was gone. The next week, someone dumped a bag of reeking, shredded fish entrails next to his trash cans. A few days later, the same thing occurred, only this time it was smeared all across his driveway. He filed a report with the sheriff's department, but the deputy barely looked up from his device. "Sounds like a standard neighbor dispute," he said dismissively. "Try to keep the peace." Taryn leaned forward. "So they can vandalize my home, and you're telling me to keep the peace?" The deputy sighed. "Look, we'll log it. But without a witness or any camera footage, there's really not much we can do." That very night, Taryn went out and bought 2 security cameras, mounting one with a clear view of the driveway. The other he pointed directly toward the lake. If someone wanted to play games with him again, he would at least get a look at their face. A few evenings later, he was on his porch nursing a cup of coffee when he saw Evelyn Strafford making her way down the path. Clad in her usual beige slacks and sun visor, she stopped directly in front of his gate. "Good evening, Mr. Blake," she said, her tone laced with false pleasantry. "I couldn't help but notice the cameras you've installed. Yeah, he replied flatly. Slowly, he explained. There to protect my property. Her smile was taut. You are aware, I presume, that exterior surveillance requires HOA approval, correct? He blinked, stunned. You have to be kidding me. Not in the slightest, she said. Her voice was calm, yet it cut like glass. The bylaws clearly state that all visible recording equipment must be submitted for board review to preserve the neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. A bitter laugh escaped him as he shook his head. You mean the same board that conveniently ignored the vandalism and the threats? The ones made against me. She crossed her arms, her posture rigid. If you're implying the HOA condones harassment, I find that deeply offensive. You want to know what I find offensive? He said, rising to his feet. Being treated like an outcast simply because I don't conform to your perfect little picture. Evelyn tilted her head, a patronizing gesture. This has nothing to do with belonging. It's about compliance, nothing more. He advanced a single, deliberate step toward her. His voice was steady, laced with ice. If you're so concerned with rules, perhaps you should start with the environmental ones. I hear there's some kind of lake treatment on the agenda. For the first time, the smirk vanished from her face. You shouldn't believe every rumor you hear, Mr. Blake. The HOA is perfectly aware of what it's doing. I'm sure it is, he muttered, especially when it involves getting rid of someone. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stalked away. The sharp snap of her heels on the pavement echoed in the silence. Tehran remained standing for a moment, his heart hammering in his chest, before sinking back into his chair. Scout lay faithfully beside him, head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on his owner with quiet concern. The following morning, the cameras detected motion near the dock just as dawn broke. Tehran replayed the footage, his blood running cold. Two figures, their faces obscured by caps, their hands hidden by gloves. They were methodically emptying the contents of large containers directly into the lake. The labels on the canisters were impossible to make out clearly. But then, caught in the glare of a flashlight, he saw a single chilling word: toxic. He grabbed his phone and immediately called Ruth Ann. You need to get over here. Now. She was there in under 20 minutes, still dressed in her work uniform. Tehran didn't waste a second, immediately showing her the footage. The color drained from her face. Tehran, that's industrial-grade chemical packaging. That is not standard algae treatment. Can you trace it? He pressed. She hesitated, the gravity of the situation sinking in. If they bypassed the proper documentation, it'll be difficult. But I might be able to pull the county inventory lists and check if any restricted materials have been purchased in the area. Tehran leaned forward, his voice urgent. Please, Ruth Ann, do it. She gave a firm nod. I will, but Tehran, you have to be careful. If the HOA discovers you have this footage, they'll come after you. A weary, humorless smile touched his lips. They already are. For the next several days, he laid low. The atmosphere in the neighborhood grew thick with tension, like the air before a storm. Residents began to shun the lake completely. The sound of children playing by the water's edge vanished. And then, the signs appeared. Bright orange boards declaring, "Do not enter. Water treatment in progress." One afternoon, Evelyn stood beside them, a clipboard in hand, directing two maintenance workers with the authority of a general commanding an army. Tehran approached her. Are you certain it's safe for them to be handling that material without any gloves? She fixed him with an icy stare. This is no longer your concern, Mr. Blake. It is when you're poisoning the very lake I live beside, he retorted. Her gaze darted to the maintenance men, who had frozen in place. That's enough, she snapped. You are now harassing the workers. Leave, before I have you reported. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. The thumping of his own heart was deafening. He wanted to scream, to call the authorities, to do something, anything. But all that came out was a low warning. You are going to regret this, Evelyn. Her expression remained a mask of stone, not nearly as much as you will. And with that, Tehran turned and walked away. His fists were white-knuckled, every muscle coiled in tension. He had no idea what they'd dumped into that water, but he was certain it had nothing to do with algae. This was about him, a realization that burned through his chest like acid. And that very night, Ruth Ann called Tehran. I pulled the purchase logs, she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and fear. The HOA bought 30 gallons of a copper sulfate blend, the industrial-grade kind, the type that's banned for residential water systems. Tehran's stomach plunged. Then why would they? They didn't file a permit, she interrupted, her words sharp. They bought it under the name of a landscaping contractor, one that doesn't even exist. He sat in stunned silence, staring out at the lake as it began to glow with an unnatural sheen under the moonlight. A ghostly film was spreading across its surface, a harbinger of the real consequences of that so-called treatment. The fallout would begin to show, and this time, no one in Cypress Glen would be able to look away. The following week started with a smell. It wasn't strong enough to make you gag, just a sharp, metallic odor that was profoundly wrong, the kind of chemical scent that clings to your very being. By Tuesday morning, the foul air had infiltrated the entire neighborhood, a silent, toxic invader. Worried whispers began to circulate. Mrs. Kramer, who lived 3 doors down from Tehran, complained that her dog refused to even touch its water bowl. The Mendozas said their tap water had a strange, metallic taste, as if it had been festering in old copper pipes. Yet the HOA kept sending out sickeningly cheerful emails, all about routine lake maintenance. Tyrone stood at his kitchen sink, staring at the deceptively clear water streaming from the faucet. He filled a glass, swirled it under the light, and his eyes caught the faintest, oily shimmer on the surface. He immediately poured it out. His heart hammered against his ribs. By noon, the lake was unrecognizable, a grotesque parody of what used to be clear. The rippling water was now a murky, pale green, a sickening film clinging to the surface as dead fish bobbed lifelessly near the shore. Even the birds had fallen silent. Tehran walked down to the dock, holding a cloth over his nose and mouth against the stench. He crouched to get a closer look and spotted the evidence. Small, telltale clumps of blue crystals stuck to the wooden posts. He didn't need Ruth Ann to tell him what it was. He already knew. Copper sulfate, he muttered, the name tasting like poison. As he stood, Evelyn's sharp voice cut through the air. "Mr. Blake, you're not supposed to be near the water." He turned to see her. She was standing with 2 HOA board members, all of them sporting identical, bright orange vests that looked freshly purchased for the occasion. "You're poisoning the lake," he said, his voice level. Evelyn offered a placid, condescending smile. "We're improving it." The algae growth was becoming an eyesore. "There wasn't any algae," Tyrone shot back. She tilted her head, feigning perfect confusion. "Mr. Blake, I think your personal feelings are clouding your judgment." The HOA consulted a professional. Just then, Ruth Ann appeared, striding purposefully towards them, a folder clutched to her chest. A professional who doesn't exist. Evelyn's polite facade cracked, her face stiffening. "Excuse me? I checked the county's license database," Ruth Ann said, breathless but firm. "There's no company by that name registered for environmental treatment. You forged the documentation." The 2 board members exchanged nervous glances. Evelyn turned on them sharply. "Gentlemen, I believe that's enough for today. You can go." They hesitated for a moment before scurrying away. Evelyn waited until they were out of earshot before her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You are far out of your lane, Miss Marlowe. This is not your jurisdiction." Ruth Ann didn't flinch. "No, but public health is not a game, and what you did could poison our groundwater." Evelyn folded her arms. "I'll take my chances." Tyrone stepped closer, his voice low. "No, you took ours. That is our water, our homes, our children." She shot him a venomous look. "Perhaps if you hadn't made yourself such a constant nuisance, none of this would have been necessary." For a tense moment, silence fell. The breeze rustled through the reeds, carrying that acrid chemical stench. Tehran's voice was a raw whisper when he finally spoke. "You did this because of me?" Evelyn looked away. "Believe whatever you want." Ruth Ann pulled out her phone, her expression grim. "I am reporting this to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality." Evelyn offered no response. She just turned and strode back toward her house. Her shoulders were stiff and deliberate. The very next day, the first residents fell sick, starting with stomach cramps and waves of nausea. It began mostly with the children. Then the adults started complaining of rashes, dizziness, and splitting headaches. The local urgent care center was completely overwhelmed. By Wednesday, the county issued a boil water advisory, an email that landed in every Cypress Glen inbox at once. "Do not consume tap water until further notice. Source of contamination under investigation." Tehran read it 3 times. Then he looked out his window, where the lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, both beautiful and toxic at the same time. His phone rang. It was Ruth Ann. "The county is sending inspectors," she said, her voice tight. "They're taking samples tomorrow. If the contamination traces back to the HOA, this is going to explode." "Good," Tehran said grimly. "It should, but the damage was already spreading." One of the families living near the park, the Gonzaleses, had to rush their toddler to the hospital after he drank from the garden hose. Pets were falling ill, and parents were starting to panic. Evelyn's pristine neighborhood had devolved into chaos overnight. When the county truck arrived, Tehran watched from his porch. Two inspectors in full protective suits waded into the shallows, collecting samples in sterile glass jars. The smell hit them immediately. One of them coughed through his mask. "It smells like copper sulfate," the younger one added. "But there's something else mixed in." Tehran approached them. "Do you think it's dangerous?" The older inspector looked up at him. "Sir, if you've been drinking this water, I would switch to bottled immediately." That night, local news vans were parked at the entrance to Cypress Glen as reporters interviewed residents under their porch lights. Their faces were drawn with worry. Evelyn refused to speak on camera, while the HOA issued a short, sterile statement. It claimed an over-application of lake treatment chemicals and a miscommunication with their contractors. Tehran sat in his living room watching the report, his phone buzzing with messages from neighbors, some apologizing for not believing him sooner. Others were asking if he knew more, but he didn't answer any of them. He just stared at the footage of the lake on the screen. The very thing behind his home that had drawn him here was now a poisoned reflection of everything that had gone wrong, he whispered to himself. "All of this, just because I wanted to fish." Scout whimpered softly from the floor, resting his head on Tehran's boot. The dog was recovering, but was still weak. Tehran reached down and scratched behind his ear. "Don't worry, buddy," he said quietly. "We'll fix this." But fixing it meant exposing everything, and that would force Tehran to confront just how deep the corruption ran. The illusion of Evelyn's control had shattered by the time the inspectors departed. Cypress Glen bore no resemblance to the picture. Perfect community Evelyn Strafford had sold to its residents. Lawn sprinklers stood silent, and hoses lay coiled and impotent. Nearly every doorstep was now a fortress of bottled water. The neighborhood that once boasted of being the most pristine in Brazos County carried the faint, sickening stench of decay and chemicals. Tehran Blake filled his days helping neighbors flush their pipes and distribute jugs of clean water. It wasn't his duty, no one had asked, but the gnawing inaction was unbearable. The media had already branded Cypress Glen, the poisoned lake community, and the scandal was spreading like a contagion across Texas. Yet Evelyn refused to concede any wrongdoing. She dispatched another HOA email, brazenly titled "A Temporary Setback," which deflected blame onto a phantom contractor and assured residents that the situation was fully under control. By then, most residents recognized the lie for what it was. Ruth Ann arrived that evening. A manila folder was clutched under her arm, the exhaustion etched deep into her face. "They've tested the samples," she announced, letting the folder fall onto Tehran's kitchen table. "The primary compound is copper sulfate, but they found a secondary agent, benzalkonium chloride. It's an industrial disinfectant," she clarified, "completely unapproved for use in open water." Tehran's fingers traced the damning words as he flipped through the pages. Each one was stamped with official county letterheads and stark lab results. "So, what does this mean?" he asked. "It means they didn't just over-treat the lake." Ruth Ann's voice was barely a whisper. "They poisoned it." He rubbed his temples, the chilling realization dawning. "And we're all drinking from that same supply." She nodded gravely. "Every single house in this neighborhood is on the same groundwater system. The contamination levels are far beyond anything considered safe." He shoved his chair back from the table, a hot rage building in his chest. "She did this. She did all of this just to get rid of me. All that nonsense about algae. It was just to prove a point." Ruth Ann met his furious gaze with a sad, weary look. "She didn't just hurt you, Tehran. She hurt everyone." He began pacing the length of his kitchen. "So, what's our next move? The county is aware. The story is public. What else is there to do?" She hesitated for a moment before revealing her trump card. "I have copies of the invoices. The chemical order was placed directly through the HOA account. I can prove Evelyn personally signed off on it." Tehran froze mid-stride. "You're certain?" "I'm certain. I printed them this morning from the county database, before she has a chance to wipe the records clean." His eyes fell to the folder again, the full weight of what she was risking settling upon him. "You could lose your job for this." Ruth Ann offered a slight, defiant shrug. "Sometimes, doing the right thing comes at a price." They sat in a heavy silence for a moment, the only sound the slow, steady breathing of Scout filling the room. Finally, Tehran broke the silence. "If we go public with this, she's finished. And that," Ruth Ann warned, "is precisely why she will come for you." The next morning proved her prophetic. Tehran awoke to find his front lawn desecrated, littered with flyers. In large, aggressive letters, they proclaimed HOA VIOLATORUNDERINVE STIGATIONDONOTENGAGE. Evelyn had smeared his name across every community bulletin board. The flyer was a screed, accusing him of spreading misinformation and harassing members of the HOA. He tore one violently from his fence and stormed toward the clubhouse. Evelyn was there, naturally, a clipboard clutched in her hand, feigning oversight of the cleanup crews near the playground. "You've gone too far," Tehran seethed, brandishing the crumpled flyer. She offered a thin, cold smile without even looking up. "It's public information, Mr. Blake." The board approved it. "You forged a contractor's signature. You poisoned an entire lake. Do you really think a piece of paper is going to scare me?" At that, Evelyn finally looked up. Her gaze was like ice, unwavering. "You don't belong here. You've been a problem from the very day you arrived. All I ever wanted was a neighborhood with some self-respect." "Itself?" Terrence's voice fractured. "Respect? You have no respect for life itself." By now, neighbors were gathering. Their phones were out, whispers spreading. For the first time, Evelyn's confident facade faltered. "You should leave now, before this gets much worse for you," she uttered. But Terrence didn't budge. "No, you've hidden behind your rules for long enough. People are sick, children are in the hospital, and you're still pretending this is about saving property values?" A low murmur began to ripple through the crowd. Ruth Ann stepped forward, holding the folder high. "We have proof of what she's done. Signed invoices, but no permits, no contractor. The HOA paid for illegal chemicals with our community funds." Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "You can't just barge in here with these accusations." "Then explain this," Ruth Ann interrupted, waving the papers. "Explain why your signature is on every single purchase order." A heavy silence fell. A few neighbors gasped. One woman covered her mouth in shock as Evelyn's eyes darted around. She was searching for an escape, but the faces staring back at her were no longer supportive. They were angry, betrayed. Terrence spoke quietly. "You poisoned the very people you were supposed to protect." Evelyn took a stumbling step backward. I didn't realize it would go this far." Ruth Ann's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "You knew enough to fake the documents. You just never thought you would get caught." Evelyn turned abruptly and walked away. Her heels struck the pavement in a fast, uneven rhythm. No one followed her. That night, sleep wouldn't come for Terrence as he sat by the window. The lake glowed faintly under the moon, and he contemplated how something as peaceful as water could be turned deadly by human pride. Ruth Ann called just after midnight. "The county is issuing a formal investigation," she said. "They'll be back with environmental enforcement officers tomorrow." "This isn't just about fines anymore, Terrence. It's criminal." He exhaled slowly. "Good. It's time someone took responsibility." She paused before replying, "They will, but it might get messy." He looked out at the reflection of the moon on the poisoned water. "It's already messy," he said. "Now, it's time for the truth." But Evelyn was not ready to surrender, and her next move would transform the Cypress Glen scandal into a full-blown criminal investigation. The next morning, Cypress Glen awoke to the rumble of diesel engines and the sound of heavy boots. 3 state vehicles were parked near the clubhouse, their sides marked with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality logo. Investigators in khaki uniforms moved methodically along the lake's edge. They were scooping samples, snapping photos, and marking off restricted zones with red tape. Terrence watched it all from his porch. The tension sat heavy in his chest, but for once, he wasn't the one being watched. Evelyn's house, usually so pristine and quiet, now had 2 county inspector vehicles parked right outside. She tried to keep her blinds closed, but everyone knew she was home. Ruth Ann arrived mid-morning, carrying a binder and a determined look. "They're pulling every single HOA record for the last 6 months," she said. "Emails, purchase orders, everything. If there's even one sign of tampering, she's finished." Terrence breathed out. "Do you think she'll cooperate?" Ruth Ann shook her head, not willingly. "But there's enough already to justify a subpoena." As they spoke, Evelyn stepped out of her house. Impeccably dressed as ever, yet with her hair slightly askew, she approached them, her voice a low but resolute command. "I trust you're both satisfied. You've transformed our community into a complete spectacle. Tehran met her gaze, his expression calm but his resolve unbreakable. "You brought this upon yourself." "I was maintaining order," she shot back. "Do you honestly believe this circus, the news vans, the caution tape, the investigators? It's utterly mortifying." Ruth Ann crossed her arms, her look dismissive. "Perhaps you should have considered that before. You started purchasing industrial-grade chemicals over the internet." Evelyn's face turned to stone. "You are both making a grave mistake." "That's amusing," Tyrone murmured, "because so did you." She shot him a venomous look for a long moment, then spun on her heel and marched to her car, muttering threats about lawyers and defamation. Later that afternoon, a man in a stark gray suit appeared at Tyrone's doorstep. He introduced himself as Agent Clark Sorrell, Environmental Crimes Division. His tone was all business, but weighed down with an unmistakable urgency. "Mr. Blake, we have confirmation that contamination levels are well above the state-mandated limits," he explained, presenting Tehran with a printed chart. "This is far from a minor infraction. Whoever sanctioned this is looking at potential criminal charges." Tehran gave a slow, deliberate nod. "What is it you require from me?" "Anything that can link the HOA's actions directly to intent," Sorrell responded. "Emails, recordings, statements from witnesses. You mentioned you had security cameras." Without a word, Tehran led him to the computer in his living room and played the recording. Shadowy figures in the pre-dawn light, heaving barrels into the lake. The agent leaned in, his focus sharp. "This is very good," he remarked. "We can't make out their faces, but the timestamps perfectly align with the delivery records we've uncovered." Just then, Ruth Ann arrived, carrying another sheaf of documents, the very copies of the falsified invoices she had printed just days before. "Here," she announced, handing the stack to Sorrell. "Every single purchase, signed off on by Evelyn Strafford herself. She used the HOA's funds to procure the chemicals, funneling it all through a phantom contractor." The agent nodded, his eyes rapidly scanning the pages. "This confirms our suspicions. She attempted to fabricate a shell company." Tehran folded his arms across his chest. "So, what's the next step?" "We'll be securing a warrant for her records. It's highly likely we'll press charges for environmental tampering, fraud, and the misappropriation of community funds," Sorrell continued. "But to do that, we'll need official statements from you both. Are you prepared to testify?" Tehran's response was immediate. "Absolutely." Ruth Ann's voice was just as firm. "You can count on me." By nightfall, the news had blazed through the neighborhood like a wildfire. Neighbors clustered in small, anxious groups, whispering about the possibility of arrests, while others simply avoided making eye contact with anyone. The atmosphere had palpably shifted. The fear was giving way to a simmering anger. That evening, Evelyn's porch light remained dark. For the first time in months, her car sat unmoving in the driveway. The next morning brought a new development. State officers were back, this time with official papers. Behind twitching curtains, neighbors watched as Evelyn was escorted from her home. There were no handcuffs, but there was no dignity left, either. She tried to protest, the cameras capturing her every word. "This is pure harassment," she cried out. "I was simply following procedure." Agent Sorrell's reply was calm and cutting. "Ma'am, procedure does not include creating fictitious contractors or dumping prohibited chemicals into a public water supply." Tehran stood at the edge of his property, a silent observer. For months, he had been branded a nuisance, a troublemaker, an outcast. And now, the very woman who had tried to destroy his life was facing her reckoning in full view of the entire community. Yet, it didn't feel like a victory. Not quite. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Ruth Ann rapped on his door once more. Exhaustion was etched onto her face, yet she offered a weak smile. "They're bringing her in for questioning," she explained. Apparently, the HOA treasurer handed over every single internal email. There's no escaping it now. Tyrone collapsed into a chair, massaging the tense muscles in his neck. "I ought to feel relieved, but all my mind can fixate on is that water, still just sitting out there." Ruth Ann nodded in understanding. "The cleanup will take months. They're starting to drain a section of it tomorrow. They have to treat the soil, too," he murmured. "I suppose this is what justice looks like." Her gaze swept across his living room, taking in the half-drained water bottles, the weary dog, and the windows still clouded with a film from the chemical vapors. "Justice is never as pristine as we imagine it," she observed. "But what you did, Tehran, it mattered. You refused to let them silence you." His eyes drifted back to the window. The lake lay motionless, its surface a dull, lifeless sheet. and he recalled the first time he'd ever cast his line there. He remembered the quiet contentment he'd felt. That place had been his sanctuary. Now, it was nothing but a scar on the landscape. He turned back to face her. "So, what becomes of the HOA now?" "They'll dissolve the board," she explained. "At least until the state concludes its investigation," Ruth Ann continued. "But Evelyn, she's finished. There's no coming back from something like this." Tyrone gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Good." He rose, moved to the door, and stared out at the lake, now bound in caution tape. She was so desperate to control this place that she ended up destroying it. Ruth Ann's voice was soft. People like her always do. But the fallout was only just beginning, and the trials to come would test the entire neighborhood in ways none of them could have ever foreseen. By week's end, Cypress Glen had lost all semblance of a neighborhood. It had become a contamination zone. Strips of yellow tape danced ominously in the wind as trucks rumbled in and out, hauling away loads of poisoned earth, while workers in gloves and masks patrolled the lake's edge with hoses and testing kits. The air, which once carried the scent of freshly cut grass, now held the faint, acrid stench of chlorine and metal. The residents had pivoted from denial to pure outrage. People who once smiled at Evelyn Strafford were now screaming her name on the local news. Parents clutched signs near the subdivision entrance, their messages stark. "Our kids deserve clean water and we trusted you." Inside his home, Tyrone Blake watched the live report unfold on his television. The news anchor stood before the very dock where he had fished every single weekend. A grim line of dead fish still visible, floating in the background. The water was a murky, lifeless gray, and the reporter's voice was somber. Officials have confirmed that hazardous chemicals were intentionally introduced into the Cypress Glen Lake system by the Homeowners Association, led by its former president, Evelyn Strafford. The contamination has impacted over 200 homes, and residents are now demanding accountability. Tyrone hit the mute button and sank back, rubbing his face. He felt a hollow sense of vindication, overshadowed by sheer exhaustion. The price of being right, it seemed, was a cost borne by everyone. A sharp knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. When he opened it, Tom Ridley stood there. The older man from the HOA meeting was holding a gallon jug of water. "They're handing these out over at the park," Tom offered. "Thought you might need some." "Thanks," Tyrone replied, taken aback. Tom hesitated for a moment, then added quietly, "I owe you an apology. I just figured you were stirring the pot. I never imagined it would come to this." Tyrone simply shook his head. "You weren't the only one. People believe whatever is most comfortable." Tom nodded grimly. "We all just wanted peace. Turns out, we confused silence with peace." With Tom gone, Tyrone sat on the porch with Scout, his gaze fixed on the cleanup crews for the first time in months. No one averted their eyes anymore. A few neighbors even offered tentative waves, a silent plea to start anew. That evening, the HOA convened an emergency meeting in the clubhouse, but this time, Evelyn's seat was conspicuously empty. She was still being interrogated by investigators, but her absence offered no relief. It only made the atmosphere feel raw as the interim chairperson stood. A quiet man named Peter Langley tried to establish order, his voice faltering. "We need to discuss temporary leadership," he continued, his voice trembling slightly. "The HOA cannot simply dissolve overnight. We still have bills, the water, remediation costs." A woman's sharp voice cut in from the crowd. "You mean we have to pay for her time's catastrophe?" Another man shot to his feet. "She used our dues to buy that poison. I'm not giving this HOA another cent." The room erupted into a storm of overlapping shouts and anger. Amid the fear and disbelief, Tyrone sat in the back, arms crossed, watching the foundations of their community crumble. These were the same people who had once lectured him about fishing because it looked unprofessional. Now the reality was dawning on them. They were finally facing what that obsession with appearances had truly cost them all. At last, Ruth Ann's voice cut through the chaos. "Enough," she said with sharp authority, and the room fell silent. "Yelling will not mend what has been shattered. We can't reverse what she did, but we can ensure nothing like this ever happens again," someone muttered. "Easy for you to say. You still have your job." Ruth Ann turned toward the voice. "You think this hasn't cost me? I reported my own neighborhood. My career is under review because of it. But I would do it again." The silence that followed was heavy, yet profoundly honest. Tyrone's voice finally broke through. "You all wanted order so badly, you let one person decide what was right and wrong for everyone. That is how this happened. It wasn't just Evelyn. it was everyone who chose to look away. In the quiet, a few people lowered their eyes. Others nodded in slow, pained agreement. After the meeting, Ruth Ann caught up with him outside. "That was brave," she said. He just shrugged. It didn't feel brave. It just felt true. She offered a faint smile. The truth usually does. They walked along the taped-off path by the lake, the air humming with the sound of pumps sucking contaminated water through long, black hoses. Taryn stopped, looking out at the warped reflection of floodlights on the water's surface. "It's strange," he said quietly, "how something so beautiful could hide something so toxic." Ruth Ann nodded. "People are like that too." The following day, the first lawsuit struck the county courthouse. Cypress Glen, residents versus the Homeowners Association. Dozens of families had signed on. Lawyers and reporters flooded the neighborhood overnight. It was no longer just a local story, it had become a national spectacle. Evelyn's face was everywhere, on every news segment. It dominated social media threads and community forums. Her statement, issued through her lawyer, was chillingly concise. "My intent was to protect property values and maintain safety. I never anticipated environmental harm." The comment section beneath the article was absolutely savage. One person wrote, "You tried to protect property values by poisoning your neighbors. Good luck with that defense." That night, Taryn's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." No name was attached, just the chilling message. He stared at it for a very long time before showing it to Ruth Ann the next morning. She frowned. "It could be anyone, but that certainly sounds like her. Let her talk," he said. "The more she does, the deeper the hole she digs for herself." Nevertheless, it unsettled him. He had confronted her directly, face to face. But this felt different, like a pervasive shadow that refused to dissipate. And as investigators began to unearth even more concealed details of Evelyn's scheme, the darkness looming over Cypress Glen was about to become more profound than anyone had ever expected. 2 weeks later, the once quiet streets of Cypress Glen had transformed into a procession of government vehicles and reporters. Vans bristling with satellite dishes lined the curbs, and neighbors who once bickered over lawn maintenance now spoke in hushed tones about indictments. Lawsuits and criminal charges were on everyone's lips. The entire town of Bryan, Texas, seemed to be consumed by their story. For Taryn Blake, the attention felt profoundly strange. Strangers now recognized him at the grocery store, whispering, "That's the man who exposed the HOA." He had never asked to become a symbol for anyone, but that's what he had become. The man who had stood up to the system, the very system that had poisoned its own people. The real storm, however, was still gathering force behind closed doors. Evelyn Strafford had finally broken her silence. Through her attorney, she issued a statement claiming she was misled by a third-party contract. She insisted she had acted in the best interest of the community, a claim that convinced absolutely no one, least of all the state's Environmental Crimes Division. They had already traced the purchases directly back to her personal authorization. On a humid Tuesday morning, the county courthouse was filled to capacity with residents waiting for updates. Taryn and Ruth Ann sat side by side near the back row. Neither of them said much. They didn't have to. The palpable tension in the air was enough to fill the room. Then, Evelyn walked in. She looked like a completely different person. Her hair was no longer perfectly styled, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a beige handbag. She deliberately avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Taryn, as cameras flashed relentlessly. The prosecutor began methodically outlining the case. Falsified invoices, misuse of funds, unlawful environmental discharge, reckless endangerment. Each charge landed with more weight than the last. Evelyn's lawyer tried to interject, claiming a lack of intent, but the prosecutor's evidence spoke far louder. Emails, payment receipts, and chemical order confirmations signed in her very own name. Ruth Ann leaned toward Taryn and whispered, "There is no way she walks away from this." He simply nodded, keeping his eyes fixed on the front. For all her arrogance, Evelyn looked small now. She was swallowed by the same rules she once used to control others. When it was Taryn's turn to testify, the courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor asked him to explain what had initially led to his suspicions. "I just wanted to fish," he said simply. "That's all. I wasn't trying to make trouble, but when I saw her targeting me, rewriting rules and ignoring safety, I couldn't stay quiet. Then my dog got sick, and kids started falling ill. That's not something you just let slide." He paused, glancing briefly at Evelyn before continuing. She thought the lake was hers to control, but she forgot that when you poison one part of the water, you poison it for everyone. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Evelyn's lawyer began his cross-examination, attempting to twist his motives. "Mr. Blake, isn't it true that you held a personal grudge against Miss Strafford?" Taryn's voice remained calm. "No, but I learned she had one against me," the lawyer pressed. "You publicly accused her without a shred of proof, before the investigation had even concluded." Tyrone met his gaze directly. Proof showed up soon enough. The quiet statement landed with more force than any shout ever could. Once court adjourned for the day, a swarm of reporters descended upon Tyrone and Ruth Ann outside, and one of them called out, "Do you feel vindicated now that she's facing charges?" Tyrone paused, then replied, "Vindication doesn't purify the water or heal sick children. I just want to see this made right." That response, delivered with his quiet dignity, became the headline on the evening news. It resonated with people far more than any furious speech ever could have. Meanwhile, inside Evelyn's once immaculate home, investigators meticulously sifted through her files and electronic devices. They discovered an entire folder labeled Maintenance Projects, filled with emails that detailed her schemes to restrict unwanted use of the lake and to deter non-compliant residents. One particular message, sent just weeks before the poisoning, held her chilling words. "If this doesn't discourage him, nothing will." That single email had effectively sealed her fate. By the following week, the district attorney announced the formal charges: environmental negligence, fraud, and reckless endangerment. All felonies, each carrying potential prison time. When the news broke, the community erupted once more. Some residents expressed relief, while others were furious it had taken so long. But this time, no one defended her. That evening, Tyrone found himself drawn back to the edge of the lake. He watched as crews installed aeration pumps, working to cleanse the contaminated water. Ruth Ann approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It's hard to believe this is almost over," she said softly. He nodded. "Almost. But not really. The lake won't be safe for months, maybe even years." She took a sip of her drink, her gaze lingering on him. "You did something people will remember. You stopped her." Tyrone just shrugged. "Maybe, but it shouldn't take the poisoning of an entire town for people to finally see what's wrong." They stood in a shared silence for a long moment as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting streaks of gold across the surface of the wounded water. And for the first time in months, Tyrone noticed a frog near the bank. It was small, fragile, but undeniably alive. Ruth Ann followed his gaze and offered a faint smile. Nature always finds a way back. He nodded slowly, if people let it. The very next day, Evelyn Strafford was led out of her home in handcuffs. The news cameras captured her every step, and the same neighbors who once feared her now watched on with a quiet, grim satisfaction. Later that night, as a news anchor summarized the story, Tyrone muted the television. He had no desire to hear her name ever again. He stepped outside, breathing in the warm Texas air, and listened to the faint, persistent hum of the pumps cleaning the lake. Scout padded up beside him, his tail wagging weakly, but alive. "Come on, boy," Tyrone said softly. "Let's see if this place can heal." But the healing wasn't just for the lake. It was for everyone who had learned just how easily pride and prejudice could poison more than just water. It could poison the very hearts of a community. The cleanup effort lasted through most of that summer. The lake, once the crown jewel of Cypress Glen, was now encircled by warning signs and floating barriers as the water gradually began to clear. But its reflection still appeared wounded, like a mirror that had been shattered and painstakingly glued back together. Life in the neighborhood carried on, slowly and cautiously. The laughter of children returned to the air, though parents kept bottled water nearby, just in case. People began mowing their lawns again, waving to one another, all trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. But beneath it all, there was a quiet humility now. A shared sense of blame lingered in the atmosphere, and for Taryn Blake, the lake possessed an inexplicable magnetism. Each evening when he returned from work, he would settle onto his back porch, Scout resting at his feet, his gaze fixed on the water while his fishing rod remained untouched in the shed. He simply couldn't bring himself to use it yet, assuring himself he would wait until the water was declared safe once more, if it ever truly could be. Then one evening, Ruth Ann Marlowe appeared, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea as she came to join him. She settled beside him, and for a long while, they sat in a comfortable silence. The air had grown cooler, the chemical stench finally gone. It was replaced by the rich, earthy scent of freshly treated soil. She finally broke the silence, saying, "You know the county's offering restitution for the damage. They're discussing a complete restoration of the lake, new pumps, advanced filtration, a total replacement of the entire system." Taryn acknowledged her words with a nod. "That's good. Maybe this place can finally breathe again." She studied him for a moment. "You don't sound particularly happy." A faint smile touched his lips. "I am grateful, but I can't stop thinking that it never should have taken all this for people to finally care." Ruth Ann gazed out over the water. People crave comfort. They don't start paying attention until something hurts them. He took a sip from his glass. "Yeah, I suppose pain is a far greater motivator than reason ever is." From a few houses down, the sound of children's laughter floated across the lake, reminding him of those first few months after he'd moved in, back before. The stares, the discoveries, the threatening notes, back to a time when he believed he had finally found some peace. After a pause, he spoke. "Do you ever wonder why she despised me so much?" Ruth Ann considered it for a second. "Control," she stated simply. "You represented something she couldn't manage. Perhaps it was never really about you at all, but about her own fear. People like her thrive on power, not on understanding." Taryn sighed. "She ruined everything, just to protect an image." Ruth Ann nodded. "An image can't drink water, but people can." They fell silent once more, watching the fading sunlight dance across the surface of the healing lake. For the first time in months, a heron touched down near the shore, its long legs moving with deliberate care through the shallows. A faint smile crossed Taryn's face. "I guess nature forgives a lot faster than people do." Ruth Ann rose to leave, but turned back before she walked away. "Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened," she said. "Maybe it's about choosing not to carry her hatred any further." Her words resonated with him long after she was gone. Later that night, Taryn made his way down to the dock. The old boards still groaned beneath his weight, but the air smelled cleaner now. There was a faint, earthy scent, something that felt almost normal. He sat on the edge, his feet dangling just above the water, and for a long moment, he simply listened. To the crickets chirping in the grass, a distant dog barking down the street, the gentle rhythm of the wind brushing across the water's surface. He whispered, "You're still here." Behind him, Scout let out a soft bark, his tail wagging. Taryn reached back, scratching the dog's ear. "Yeah, boy," he murmured. "We made it through." His mind drifted back over everything that had transpired, the confrontations, the fear, the unending tension. And then a realization struck him, something he hadn't seen before. The true poison wasn't just in the water, it was in the way. People had stopped seeing each other as neighbors. Evelyn Strafford had received a sentence of 3 years in a state penitentiary. That, plus restitution fines. The HOA was dissolved, replaced by a volunteer community council. Taryn never attended any of the hearings. He felt no need to. Justice had already served its purpose. Months passed. A local journalist came to him for a follow-up piece, and she posed a question. "If you could say just one thing to everyone watching, what would it be?" Taryn paused, gathering his thoughts, then said, "When you witness an injustice, don't just stand by waiting for a hero, and never mistake silence for peace. True peace isn't about ignoring the cracks. It's about confronting what's broken and having the courage to mend it." For a few days, the clip was everywhere, a brief spark before it was swallowed by the relentless tide of the news cycle. But for the residents of Cypress Glen, those words didn't fade. They took root and, by autumn, had begun to change everything. The county eventually declared the lake safe once more. Taryn made no announcement, but one Saturday morning, he quietly took his fishing rod down to the dock. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the water a sheet of glass. He cast his line, the whir of the reel, a familiar song he hadn't heard in years. It felt like an old, forgotten rhythm returning to his hands. After a time, the line gave a gentle pull, not a fight, just a whisper, a subtle reminder of the patience required for true healing. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips as he began to reel it in. Perhaps this place would never be perfect again, but he realized it didn't have to be. It just had to be honest. His gaze drifted across the water to Ruth Ann's house. The morning sun glinted off her kitchen window, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. It wasn't the fragile peace of denial, but the resilient kind, forged by surviving the storm. He looked down at Scout and spoke softly. "I guess we finally got our lake back." Scout let out a single sharp bark. As if in perfect accord, Taron cast his line out once more. The ripples expanded in perfect circles across the surface, a reflection of a deeper cleansing. Because in the end, the truth had purified more than just the water. It had washed over the entire neighborhood, leaving in its wake something far stronger than pride: clarity. If this story resonated with you, remember this: true change is born from a single act of courage. Subscribe for more stories that reveal the profound fragility and the immense power that lies in simply doing what is right.